Welcome to Medscape. I'm Dr. Andrew Wilner, and my guest today is Dr. Simona Nikolova, Assistant Professor of Neurology at the Mayo Clinic in Arizona. Dr. Nikolova presented a provocative abstract at the recent American Academy of Neurology meeting in Denver, Colorado. She correlated brain iron and traumatic brain injury. Dr. Nikolova is here to tell us a little more about her findings. Welcome to Medscape.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here today.
So before I interrogate you with questions, why don't you give us a little overview of what you did and what you found?
Yeah, absolutely. There has been a lot of research showing evidence of brain iron accumulation in areas involved in the pain processing in people who suffer from migraine. So the migraine research that showed that iron deposition, especially in the periaqueductal gray, is associated with poorer response to medication. So that is one of the areas that got me very interested in the field of iron accumulation in migraine. And since nobody had looked at post-traumatic headache, we decided to interrogate this question a bit more of how iron accumulates in patients with post-traumatic headache. And is there any association between iron accumulation and headache or other clinical variables? So we set out 2 years ago. We had a short 10 people pilot study that showed changes in iron accumulation in a few areas of the brain in patients with post-traumatic headache. And this ongoing study keeps recruiting people. So now we're up to 60 participants with post-traumatic headache due to mild traumatic brain injury. And we match those people with 60 healthy controls who have no injury and no headaches. So what we found was that compared to people without post-traumatic headache and without traumatic brain injury, those with history of traumatic brain injury and headaches had higher level of iron accumulation in several areas of the brain. For example, left occipital, left cerebellar, right temporal. And in these areas with post-traumatic headache had more iron accumulation than people with no headaches. So we also found that the more traumatic brain injuries people had over their lifetime, the more frequent their headaches were. And then the more likely they were to have higher iron accumulation in those areas of the brain, which could imply that there is more iron accumulation due to the recurrent headaches. We also found that the more time had passed since the concussion, the more likely people were to have higher levels of iron in these areas of the brain.
It's fantastic also that you're looking at traumatic brain injury, which is a completely different pathophysiology than migraine, although one can certainly relate to the other. If you have enough traumatic brain injuries, might exacerbate your migraine, but these are completely independent pathophysiologies. So I'm curious, when I read your abstract, my first thought was, well, there's iron in the brain. It's due to brain injury and bleeding and deposition of iron, right?
Correct.
Is that wrong?
No,
that seemed obvious.
That is
right?
not wrong, correct. So there is two ways to look at this. So there is the iron accumulation, which we could expect from the traumatic brain injury itself. So things like microbleeds or hemorrhages or all of the above could lead to iron accumulation in the area of the injury. However, there is also a different way to look at it. In addition to that, there might be iron accumulation due to the headache that is associated with a traumatic brain injury. So the question is, how do you distinguish the two? And with traumatic brain injury, there has been literature that both heme and non-heme iron exist in the brain post-injury. So how do we image that? We used a susceptibility weighted sequence, in this case, a T2 star weighted sequence, where the phase of this sequence can tell us whether this is blood or whether it is iron. Now, at this preliminary stage of our research, we do not have the distinction, but we are working on figuring out which parts of that injury which part of the iron was due to the injury and which part was due to the headache.
That's fascinating. And I think that's really, really important. And when I looked at your findings, the deposition of iron is not symmetrical, right?
Correct.
You find it's more on the left side, more on the right side, more in the front, more in the back. I mean, it was not what you would expect from just a concussion. It seemed to me that it would be so well localized.
Correct. Yes. So first of all, we're not 100% sure that everything we're detecting at this moment is iron. We need to look at the phase images to figure out the findings that we have that are on the outside of the brain. Could be due to myelination, could be due to calcification. There is definitely part of that that will not be just iron. But there is everything that is in gray matter and in the middle of the brain would be more likely to be iron. So there is future research coming here. This is very preliminary, but as you mentioned, the iron distribution is bilateral. It's not symmetric, and there is parts of it that might not be iron.
Now, let me ask you a pathophysiology question. Might be a little bit outside the imaging, but once iron is deposited in the brain, whether it's heme or non-heme, is there any way to get rid of it? Are the macrophages remove it, or is it there permanently and it will only accumulate?
That's a great question. There is a lot of research that has been going on in the area of removing iron and how the iron is detected and removed from the brain. Now, there is iron chelation therapy. There is drugs that go into the brain, they cross the blood-brain barrier and remove iron from the areas of the brain. But a lot of the work that I've seen in that is experimental and based on animal models. I don't know if there is any clear evidence that that is removing iron in the brain due to post-traumatic headache. However, there is another theory that you might find interesting, is that the repetitive network of the periaqueductal gray, that is one of the areas that we have associated with migraines and pain. If you activate that network constantly due to the repeated headaches, there is more iron that accumulates in that area as a result of that repetitive activation of the pain networks. There is hyperoxia that is associated with this process. And as a result, if the headaches progress to chronic, then the iron accumulation will persist. But if the headaches resolve, then the iron accumulation will go away. Now, the question is, there is a lot of migraine and headache, post-traumatic headache groups that work on this, and there is a lot of hypotheses going on in this, but it's very interesting that the iron accumulation due to the repetitive headaches can be removed as the headaches progress. As we age, there is a theory that the headaches become less because of hormonal changes. And if that happens, if the headaches do not chronify, do not become chronic, then we have the resolution of less iron in the brain.
Well, that's encouraging. So one question, sometimes an extreme case will shed some light. What about the patients with chronic traumatic encephalopathy? They have a lot of brain changes, right? Degeneration and gliosis. Do they also have increased iron?
I cannot answer that because I haven't looked into it, but there is evidence of chronic headache research, or chronic migraine patients who have more iron accumulation in their brains. So that will be a great, interesting field to look into in the future.
All right, I sense more papers coming.
Yes. It's a very preliminary work, so we have a lot of ideas.
All right, well, I'm Dr. Andrew Wilner reporting for Medscape. Thank you very much, Dr. Simona Nikolova.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me again.